And joining us now on the debate in Austin, Texas, Barrett Brown, former spokesperson for the activist group Anonymous, now with Project PM. In Washington, D.C., Joseph Menn, reporter at the Financial Times and the author of Fatal System Error. In New York, New York, Gabriella Coleman, assistant professor of media culture and communication at NYU. And with us here in studio, Stefania Milan with the University of Toronto's Citizen Lab. And I'm happy, first of all, to welcome everybody to the program tonight. And second of all, I want to just clap at the brain gain we've got going here in Canada. Gabriella, you're moving to McGill University in a few months. We're really glad to hear about that. And Stefania, you've just moved here from?
Hungary.
Hungary. And you've been here all of 3 weeks, so we're glad about that. You're at U of T now. That's great. Okay, let's start. Joseph, start us out with this. I suspect there are some of our viewers who just need a bit of a crash course in what hacktivism is all about. So give us your best definition, if you would.
All right, let's see. Hacktivism is a combination of computer hacking and activism. And it's actually something that dates back, more than a decade. But it was historically a bit more of sort of the prankster variety. And occasionally there'd be hacking for the sake of embarrassing a major company, particularly Microsoft or other big technology companies. People who are really pretty geeky and interested in security would find a gaping security hole. They couldn't convince the maker of the software to fix it, and then they'd embarrass them by walking through it and pilfering out whatever they could get. That's sort of one of the major origins of it. And then the more recent era hacktivism, which is getting wide attention now, dates to, I'd say, early last year when Scientology managed to offend some online bulletin board users by trying to get a video banned. And these people sort of rallied around it, and this is the origins of the modern version of Anonymous, which people have hopefully heard of by now. And they began to do organize real-world events, get a lot of publicity, and this is where the Guy Fawkes masks comes from. And eventually they sort of adopted interests that were more real-world than that, e.g. repression in places like Tunisia, and helped activists there. So it sort of began in the virtual world and has moved into the mainstream world.
Okay, Gabrielle, let me follow up with you. Is it, I mean, it started as kind of pranksterish and that kind of thing, but is there a more constructive angle to it today that you think hacktivists are involved with?
Well, when it comes to Anonymous, the term hacktivism, on the one hand, definitely applies because some of their techniques do relate to questions of sometimes breaking into a computer or using distributed denial of service attack. But they also use a lot of sort of tactics that have nothing to do with hacking or hackers, and a lot of people involved are also wouldn't identify as such. I think one of the interesting things about Anonymous is that, first of all, it's a name that anyone can take, so there's different groups or nodes or wings or arms that are sometimes unconnected. And then the second element is, just as Joseph has said, on the one hand, they've become a little bit more political, but they've also never let go fully of their kind of rowdy, pranksterish kind of roots as well.
More on Anonymous in a second. Stefania, can you give us a couple of examples, if you would, of the kinds of activities that hacktivists have gotten in trouble for?
Yeah, well, these activists are in a way innovative because they bring direct action into cyberspace. But the new element there is cyberspace, in the sense that a lot of the actions that you see online are actually very similar to what you will see offline. For example, sit-ins that become virtual sit-ins, or blockades, in the same way in which you would sit in front of, say, Sony Corporation if you have to protest against some policies of the company. These people do it online by blocking the virtual gates, so the website of the company.
But cybercrime sounds very nefarious and dangerous. Is that what we're talking about here when we talk about hacktivists?
Well, we look at both defensive and offensive tactics, and I guess that some of the more offensive tactics definitely fall under the umbrella definition of cybercrime. I don't quite like that, though. And I'm sure that many of these activists would actually object to this definition.
They don't like being called cyber criminals?
No.
No, okay.
Because they have a political agenda behind that. So
Understood.
It's not only about disrupting, but there is a reason why you do that. It's not greed.
Okay, Barrett, you're the guy who used to be involved with Anonymous, so we want to sort of pick your brains for a little bit here and find out more about them. And again, I don't want to start from the assumption that everybody knows who they are, because after all, they are anonymous. So let's start there. Who are they?
Well, Anonymous, the culture grew out of this this very unusual and unique other culture, starting at a message board called 4chan, which gained popularity in 2003, 2004. And then, of course, in early 2008, you had the Scientology campaign, which was really the first activist-oriented action conducted by Anonymous, which had been preceded by a number of occasions, which you see similar techniques, but directed more for fun. I think, as Biela, I think, alluded, Gabriela, even aside from the hacking, which of course is a major component and always probably will be of Anonymous and similar groups, I think the fundamental unit here is information warfare. Not the majority of people who have been working on these campaigns in the last couple of years are not hackers and don't have those skill sets. Rather, you have a lot of new techniques being developed by which to use information in order to achieve a goal.
And how did you get involved with these guys?
Well, I had started a group called Project PM back in 2009 that sort of had similar objectives to what Anonymous would eventually come to itself. And then I was in discussions with a lot of Anonymous participants for a while. Then when Tunisia started, I was brought in by Greg Hausch, who was one of the people who started the Scientology campaign previously, and had also provided advice to other Anons afterwards. Since this was something I've been talking about, the inevitable conflict between these procedural groups that are using the online world as their environment versus traditional institutions, which in many cases I think are losing their credibility. And so at that point, we did quite a bit in the very beginning of the Arab Spring, and I think made some very good predictions, especially relative to what else was being said by more traditional pundits. And afterwards, I continued to be involved in the legal defense after the raids began in the U.S. and U.K. And afterwards, and right now what I do is I still collaborate with some Anonymous participants within my own group, Project PM, with the goal of acquiring more information and bringing attention to what's called the intelligence contracting industry, which I'll talk about, I'm sure, later on.
Sure. Joseph, let me follow up with you. How effective do you think all of these techniques have been?
Well, in many cases, they've been very effective. I mean, there are some, depending on what you're after. I mean, I think in some ways, politically, if you're looking at it from the traditional lens of political change, Iran was a disaster. It was also a disaster for, I guess, traditional Western intelligence and folks like that were probably trying to help the rebels there. Some people in Anonymous helped the dissidents in Iran, and unfortunately they were rounded up and mostly arrested and killed. So that wasn't good. Egypt and Tunisia, I think they've been a part of the process that really helped those revolutions come to power, or at least get rid of the old power. In the U.S. and elsewhere, they've been very effective at helping spread the word, spread awareness, either through the denial of service attacks, which are like these mass sit-ins where they make websites inaccessible, and that generates headlines. And in amplifying Occupy Wall Street, I think they have helped spread the word about Occupy Wall Street. I don't think they're the ones that came up with it, but they're very good at using Twitter and YouTube and other newer forms of communication to spread the word about what a given issue is and what people are doing about it. So I think they've been very effective.
Gabriella, you are in the shadow of Wall Street right now, so I should ask you this question. How influential and or effective do you think they've been in what's been transpiring there over the last couple of weeks?
Well, there's two elements. Just to echo Joe, who put it very well, they're very good at getting media attention. In some ways, what I find so fascinating about them is that they're in the tradition of the Yippies and Abby Hoffman or the Yes Men, except they're far more populist in some ways, since anyone can contribute. And sometimes their hacks of the media are not quite as elegant, and yet they're very, very effective. And I think Occupy Wall Street is a great example of that. Definitely Occupy Wall Street has become a very large phenomenon with many different groups and stakeholders participating in many different parts of the world. And Anons, some very active Anons are very active on the ground in different cities, obviously not necessarily revealing who they are. And then a number of Anons who are very technically oriented are helping out on technical working groups on internet relay chat as well.
Stefania, I should ask you about that because we started the program by saying these aren't your grandmother's street protesters in the traditional sense of the word. These are not hippies? Is there a generational difference here between then and what's going on today?
Yeah, in my opinion, there's definitely a generational difference there. And that should also correct our speaker from New York, I think, because actually hacktivism, as we know it now, became much more visible with Anonymous, so starting in 2009, but originated actually in the second half of the 90s, where some more arty groups tried to foster a political agenda within the hacker community, which by definition wouldn't be very politically aware or much more interested into issues related to the politics of the internet, so only of the cyberspace, leaving out what happens out in the streets, if you want. What I see out there, and I've been studying activists, radical internet activists for the last 5-6 years, and I see a big generational gap between the anonymous generation and the older hackers. And in a way, you even see a funny attitude by the older hackers who are kind of dismissive towards these newer gigs, how they call them.
Dismissive?
Yeah.
How come?
Well, they believe that they are somehow at odds with the so-called hacker ethics. And they also believe they are not extremely good at what they do. So they think that they play some more tricks rather than actually real technical expert type of actions.
Gotcha.
And one big difference there is, for example, in the attitude towards the media and towards visibility. So the older hackers would not seek visibility through the media. Actually, their tactics would be much more clandestine. And this, you know, is something that that is visible also in the fact that present-time activists are much less aware, of surveillance and privacy risks related to action online. And in fact, they might be anonymous, but the FBI was able to track them down.
I'm going to read, Barrett, something out of the San Francisco Chronicle from a couple of months ago and then get you to comment on it. This is about activities that took part on the left coast of your country. The amorphous hacker group known as Anonymous made good Sunday on its threat to strike the Bay Area rapid transit system, breaching an agency website and releasing customers' personal information in retaliation for BART's decision to cut cellular phone service to prevent an anti-police protest in San Francisco. The hack attack sent BART scrambling to protect its websites, and it infuriated some riders whose information was leaked. It came as the hackers also called for a 5 p.m. protest today at BART's Civic Center station, where a police officer fatally shot a knife-wielding man on July the 3rd. Okay, let's start with this, Barrett. What do you think of that action that the hacktivists did, that Anonymous did, against BART?
Well, one of the phrases we like to use is that anonymous is not unanimous. And what that means is there's no charter, there's no leadership, there's no official titles, and there's not always agreements on tactics and objectives. In this case, this was an action that was very popular among some Anons and not entirely popular among others. Having said that, you know, when you have situations where they release, where someone releases information, personal information of innocence, that's something that's worth criticizing. There's obviously plenty to criticize within any movement and any group. I think those actions also have to be looked at in context. If one criticizes Anonymous, as one should also look at the context which they're operating. I mean, this is a context in which we have 40 of our alleged participants having been raided with guns drawn by FBI agents for having allegedly participated in a DDoS attack against a corporate website. So, and that's obviously just the small of what's going on in the world. So, yeah, of course, there's been a number of things that some people have done that should not have been done. Given that last thing, Gabriella, that Barrett just said, do you have any sympathy for the tactics of Anonymous in this case?
I'm not sure if the question of sympathy is exactly the way I would put it. I mean, I'm an anthropologist who studies Anonymous, so I get quite I get in the trenches with Anonymous, right? And obviously, I've chosen to study them because I think that they're fascinating, both anthropologically and politically. And actually, those issues are quite different. And I think when it comes to the politics of Anonymous, which is a little bit different from the anthropological dynamics I study, there's moments where I do the face palm as well. I cringe. And in some ways, I find what they do problematic, but also the fact that they're so hard to predict, and the fact that they're not unanimous is precisely why I also think they're powerful. And then also, I think when it comes to certain forms of their kind of interventions, it opens a window into kind of larger political questions, which I'm afraid if I go into, I'm going to talk for a long time, but these are definitely worth addressing. And as a citizen, I can't but help be compelled by some of the questions that Anonymous has put on the table.
Well, let me go to Joe on that then. Is there anything about that Bay Area rapid transit situation that you found defensible in terms of Anonymous's conduct?
Well, you know, I'm an objective journalist type, so I don't have opinions on things like this. I'll say that we mentioned criticism from older generation activist hacker types. One of them, certainly that's the sort of area that they do not approve of, and I think they lose a lot of their member support when they do things like print the social security numbers and home phone numbers of police officers and that sort of thing. There's this whole wing within Anonymous that has gone off on this anti-sec movement, which is anti-security. It's attacking not just defense contractors for political reasons, but also sort of garden variety law enforcement.
So in your experience then, Joe, who are they targeting and why?
If you're talking about that wing of Anonymous, you know, again, anyone can belong to Anonymous, anyone can propose a given operation, and maybe it gains support and maybe it doesn't, maybe it gains a little support. The folks that have gone after defense contractors and the like, part of that is that they feel they're part of the bad stuff that's happening on the internet, increased monitoring, reduced privacy, that sort of thing. Some of them don't like U.S. national politics overseas. You know, a lot of it seems to be against sort of Western governments, and there's probably a reason that a lot of these operations have an infrastructure that's hosted in Russia right now, and Russia doesn't have a problem, you know, helping out groups that are attacking, you know, Western powerful interests. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on there. The attacks on innocents like BART riders has cost them some membership, I think. And I think the folks on that they're more aggressive on that sort of thing. One of their defenses is, hey, this gets us media attention, and when we get more media attention, people learn about the underlying causes, and maybe they'll join some of the movement. That's the defense that they offer.
Let me pick up on something, Stefania, you said a few moments ago when you were talking about the generational differences between the older hacktivists and the younger ones, and you talked about hacker ethics.
Yeah.
Now, some people watching this may scratch their head and say, didn't realize these folks had any ethics. There are hacker ethics?
Yes, there are several items in these ethics if you want, so it's difficult to now provide a compilation of what would be in there, but generally speaking, it was an attempt by the hacker movement to find a compromise between the fact that they could actually be pretty powerful in terms of using their expertise to break into someone else's privacy, for example, or you know, security networks and so on. And what are the boundaries, right? So what is legitimate and was not legitimate tactic to adopt at a certain moment in time.
Barrett, you want to follow up on that? Was it your sense when you were part of Anonymous
Yes.
that there was an ethical code that you were following?
Yes, and you know, Joseph Min says, you know, when something like that happens with the release of information of innocent people, a lot of people in Anonymous get unhappy, and some of them will leave the movement. I think that speaks well of the constituency that makes up Anonymous, because you don't see that same kind of that ethical discussion. You don't see that wariness in so many of our opponents, such as the intelligence contracting industry. You know, as Joseph Min knows, as a famous incident now in February of this year, Aaron Barr, a CEO of an intelligence contracting firm called HB Gary Federal, came to him and said he had discovered our leadership by infiltrating us, and then Anonymous hacked him the next day, hacked his servers at his company, and took 70,000 emails. And what was discovered immediately was that he and 2 other companies that are allegedly respectable were planning a number of clandestine and very amoral, very, very dangerous campaigns against activists and against even journalists and WikiLeaks on behalf of corporations. And I've been reading through these emails ever since in an effort to better understand this industry. And I've only seen one occasion in which someone in that industry has stepped up and said, hey, is this wrong? Is this something that we should not be doing? And you know, it is, of course, again, it's important that Anonymous maintain a higher ethical standard than our opponents and than governments do, and then does most of the population of America, the ones that will support anything done by their country and by the military. So I think it's worth looking at, you know, what Anonymous has done good versus what it's done bad, and then comparing that to those of our opponents in the traditional infrastructure of the world.
Gabriella, does it seem to you, we know the official law enforcement authorities would like to have at them, but does it seem to you as if they are policing themselves well enough?
Well, it is hard to police Anonymous because anyone can call the name, and yet it's also the case that if you can't get consensus for a campaign, it falls flat on its feet. And in that sense, there is a little bit of kind of coherence and order within Anonymous. I think I'd also like to address this issue about generations and ethics and hackers.
Sure.
Because in fact, what's interesting about Anonymous is that, you know, they're not all 16, 17, or 18. There's a number who are in their 30s, which for hacking is a little bit of an older generation. And whether it's hacking back in the 80s or hacking today, there's always been different kind of ways of hacking, and hackers are quite sectarian. And so free and open source software is a form of hacking that's quite vibrant today, and yet is quite different from what happens in Anonymous. And so in any one period, I think that there's always been sort of legal hacking and transgressive hacking, back in the 70s, the 80s, 90s, and today. So I'm not so sure Anonymous is about different generations, but there's obviously different moments where transgressive hacking gains a new sort of traction and visibility, and Anonymous certainly brings that to bear today in different ways.
And Joseph, how about official law enforcement avenues? Are they getting a handle on any of this?
Well, you know, actually, yes, to not to the extent that they can arrest all the people that are participating, though they're certainly picking up a large number of people who did nothing more than participate in alleged denial of service attacks, which Barrett referred to as DDoS attacks. DDoS stands for distributed denial of service. But more impressively, the UK police, Scotland Yard, has arrested now what they claim are 3 of the 4 founders of Lulz Security, or Lulzsec, which has done nothing but attack big companies and police and government organizations. And you know, nobody's been convicted yet, but they probably, you know, they're if they are correct that they have the right people, that's fairly impressive that they got those top guys. Lulz Security is the same group that attacked HB Gary Federal and Aaron Barr, and have done some of the more dramatic attacks. In terms of getting a handle on it, they're spending a lot of time on it. It's a big priority for the FBI. Because they've never seen anything like this before, where you have criminals, you know, and part of what they're doing is criminal, whether you agree with the politics or not, who are using this mass medium, these new mass media, to distribute stolen stuff and attract supporters. I mean, you would understand if you're national law enforcement why you'd be pretty worried about a group, some of whose members say we're going to attack the CIA next. They actually do a denial of service attack on the CIA's website, and they distribute tools for doing it. And it's you know, merging crime and politics. That's a pretty scary thing if you're law enforcement. So they're trying to understand it.
And Barrett, is most of Anonymous in the United States, or do you even know?
You know, I would. There's really no way of knowing, but my impression is that a lot of the more active Anons have been European. But you have members from all over the world, and you know, increasingly in Asia, and in Russia, and as that happens, you're going to see probably a shift in emphasis, whereby we're not just going after Western interests, Western institutions to the extent that we have been, but rather more against some of the greater tyrannies of the world, like China, which is something that I think is inevitable. But it has this very strong European base and always has.
Let me follow up then with Stefania on that, because you've just come here from Hungary. Was this the kind of thing that you would hear about in Hungary?
Well, not much, but elsewhere in Europe, perhaps yes. Now, I haven't been living in Hungary very long, so I'm not fully aware of the entire, activist background of the country. But I can definitely say that there are Anonymous based in Italy. There have been even actions against people there, in Switzerland, in France, and I'm sure also in Eastern Europe.
What are, Stefania, some of the bigger, let's call them more constructive, more positive outcomes that have resulted as a result of hacktivism?
In terms of positive outcomes for movements, other movements?
For society as a whole. Yeah, for society as a whole.
Well, definitely Anonymous have contributed to bring to under the spotlight a number of issues that people might not be aware of, like security, for example. Security online, what are corporations doing with our data.
So let me just understand this. If they're hacking away at corporate accounts, for example, at corporate websites, and they can find some kind of security breach, they're doing a constructive service then for those companies, because they're showing them where the weaknesses are. Is that their argument?
Yeah, well, that's definitely part of the argument. I think, however, that their impact is more on the sort of broader public agenda. I mean, the fact that you have the media speaking about these issues, of course, makes a lot of citizens who regularly use the internet in a sort of simple way aware of the risks connected to using the internet. And so this is one outcome out there. The other, more in general, for social movements, basically what the Anonymous have done is to show that activism that is born and lives online is not only possible as an impact, real-time kind of high-scale impact, but also that it's worth it, because then everybody is going to talk about you.
Well, yeah, Joseph, let me follow up with you on that. The online approach definitely seems to be catching on these days. Why do you think that is?
Well, the online approach to everything is catching on these days, whether it's selling books or prescription drugs to mainstream politics to everything else. I mean, the internet is a bigger part of everything, and it's certainly a bigger part of activism, and I think that's permanent. In terms of what good it's done for society, I mean, I've been covering cybersecurity since 1999 or so, and there have been a lot of pretty smart people that have been yelling forever that companies do a terrible job of protecting their websites and other corporate goodies, and not much has changed. Yet, there's an argument to be made that the fear of Anonymous hacking into your database, maybe publishing credit card information, maybe just saying, publishing a couple and saying, look, we could have done it, has had an impact. There are companies that are taking security more seriously now because of this. And that's not just protecting their own stuff, that's protecting the information they have on us. So it is bringing it to a broader attention, the CEOs and members of Congress and the general public in a way that wasn't done before. So I mean, it's going to be a part of everything, not just security, but politics more broadly. I think that's how this stuff is going to be spread.
Barrett, you want to give us an example of something that you thought Anonymous got into and there was an unambiguously good public benefit at the end of the day as a result of their work?
Oh, absolutely. Many times in which there was a public benefit, but in which there was also it worked against what you might call official Western interests. I mean, Tunisia and Egypt, and to a lesser extent some other countries in the Middle East that Anonymous really helps to proceed and to get the ball rolling in. Unfortunately, several of those dictatorships were considered allies of the U.S. and were part of what you would call Western interests. So, but nonetheless, unfortunately, Western interests are oftentimes amoral. So, in so much to bringing democracy, helping to liberate, helping to help North Africans liberate themselves, is something that is a very, very major public good. It's a history-changing event, it's the best example, but there's tons of lesser ones, including, you know, our ongoing research, an exposition of this intelligence contracting industry, and capabilities like ROMAS coin and persona management that we detail at echelon2.org. Some of these things that the media has done a pretty poor job of keeping up with, and which nonetheless are going to, in the next 5–10 years, become a greater and greater threat to democratic institutions. I think that's one of the longer term public interests that Anonymous is fighting for that you really don't see anyone else doing. But there are tons of examples.
Gabriella, you want to follow up on that? Just not so much an example from the international sphere, but something domestically that Anonymous might have got involved in, and at the end of the day, there was a public good.
Sure. Well, I think what some of their actions have given us a window into what I've been calling digital privateering, by which I mean when private companies are doing the kind of dirty work of governments or corporations. So in September of 2010, Anonymous did a distributed denial of service attack against the Motion Picture Association of America after the MPAA had hired an Indian software firm to DDoS the Pirate Bay. Similarly, with the HB Gary hack, there was some, again, very damning information about a proposal for discrediting WikiLeaks as well as journalists. And I think getting a window into, again, digital privateering is quite important, because if governments are contracting private security firms to do work, the American public doesn't have avenues such as Freedom of Information Act to find out what's going on. And this is not to say that, you know, we should sanction illegal hacks as the viable means to get this information, but I do think getting this information, putting this issue on the table is something that Anonymous has done, and from there we can really get to the sort of heart of the very difficult issues that this poses as a democratic society.
Sorry, just another follow-up, Joseph, on this. Do we have any clue how many people are actually in Anonymous?
Well, it varies. You know, there are certainly hundreds of people that are always around, and then it can swell to, you know, thousands when there's a given operation that is popular. So far, some of the most popular have been denial of service attacks, which everybody can participate in, on the payment processors, like MasterCard and PayPal, that stopped taking donations for WikiLeaks. That was one of the things that really sort of made Anonymous bigger, and there were thousands of people, I believe, participating at that time.
And how do they, I mean, I presume they're not, you know, when they attack MasterCard or they attack PayPal, they're not stealing money out of these outfits, so how do these folks actually, how do they make a living?
You know, of the people that have been arrested so far, which is a few dozen, housewives, college students, people who are, you know, work in the IT department down the hall, you know, who feel like this is a way that they can express themselves and do something and have some sort of impact, where they no longer believe that showing that voting or leafleting or anything like that is going to have much of an impact. So they're willing to turn over a little of their CPU in their computer over to participate in something like this, knowing that there'll be a story about it in the next day's paper.
But Barrett, I gather you, well, I should ask, did you make any money working for Anonymous? Is that, I mean, does it work that way?
Well, I came into this as a journalist, which I really no longer am, and actually I ended up losing money and also losing that, what they call professionalism. You know, when you start running around with this crazy futuristic cyber band of alleged terrorists, you know, they don't necessarily going to let you write for the Atlantic anymore. So, I'm about to make actually a whole bunch of money off it, in so much as we have this book coming out next year with myself and Greg Hausch on Anonymous. But up until recently, I've been, my pleasures have had to derive entirely just from what we've managed to accomplish, and I've been smoking the bad kind of cigarettes, you know. So, I mean, there's a lot of people here who really dedicate a lot of their time and effort, they get no credit, and they take a lot of risks to do the things that I think is a duty of a lot of us who live in freedom based on what others have provided to us. You know, we have family members, you know, who have, you know, fought in wars and been shot at to secure liberty for ourselves and others. The very least that we can do at this time, I think, is to subject ourselves to whatever risks we have to in order to do at least a bit of our part.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left here, and I want to get each of you to finish this sentence. Hacktivism is most effective, Stefania, when what? Hacktivism is most effective when, finish the sentence.
Well, in my opinion, it's not most, I would like to say when it is not most effective, if I may, which is not when they make the media. We have seen how, for example, part of the tactics that Anonymous have adopted so far was to make the news, to be there.
So they're most effective when they're not in the news?
Yes. Also because in this way they do not participate in putting other groups at risk.
Okay, Gabriella, they're most effective when what?
When there's a diverse political ecology with very different types of political groups and actors involved, from people who are willing to break the law to those that are willing to stay within the purview of the law. So diverse political ecology when it comes to geek and hacker activism.
Barrett, hacktivism is most effective when what?
When we stay true to our own ethics, no matter what crimes may be committed according to the failed nation states, and when we remember that information is the weapon, and information properly understood and properly used in an honest way is more effective than anything else in the world.
Joseph, you get the last word on this. It's most effective when what?
When they combine the techniques that they are very good at using with the lessons of previous generations of activists, when they apply the skills of activism, established groups towards what they're doing now.
Gotcha. Thanks, everybody, for participating tonight. Really appreciate your time on this topic. Joseph Menn of the Financial Times in Washington. Gabriella Coleman, NYU. Good luck at McGill in a couple of months when you move to Montreal. Barrett Brown, formerly with Anon, joining us tonight from Austin, Texas. And here in Toronto, Stefania Milan. Happy that you're at University of Toronto now with Citizen Lab. Thanks so much, everybody.